You know, when we think about history, we tend to remember the big names, the conquerors, the empire builders. But what about the ones who saved the day? Today, we're digging into the story of a ruler who was an absolute legend in his time, but whose name, for many of us, is a total mystery. Gautamiputra Satakarni.
Right, so if I asked you to name a great emperor, who comes to mind? Probably names like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, maybe Ashoka. Their stories are everywhere, carved into history books, and their legacies have been talked about for centuries.
But here's the thing. History has its shadows. It's filled with these incredible figures who revived dying empires, who fought off invaders against all odds, only to be kind of lost to time. We're about to pull one of those heroes into the light, a forgotten emperor from the Deccan plateau, Gautamiputra Satakarni.
Now, to really get why this guy was such a big deal, you first have to understand just how bad things were. Our story starts with the Satavahana Dynasty. See, after the massive Mauryan Empire fell, the Satavahanas rose up and became the main power in the region. But by the 1st century CE, their glory days were long gone.
I mean, their early rulers had built this mighty empire. But after they hit their peak, the dynasty went into what historians literally call a dark phase. Their power just crumbled. And you know what happens when there's a power vacuum, right? Someone else rushes in to fill it. In this case, it was a group of invaders known as the Shakas, and they just swept in, took over huge chunks of land, and pushed the once mighty Satavahanas to the absolute brink.
So, the family legacy is in tatters, the kingdom is collapsing, and it's right into this chaos that our hero is born. His name was Satakarni, but he would go down in history by the name his mother gave him, Gautamiputra, the son of Gautami.
That name, Gautamiputra, is actually fascinating. It's what's called a matronymic. It means son of Gautami. Now, this wasn't necessarily a sign of a matriarchal society. It was just a really practical solution to a common royal problem. See, kings had many wives from different families, so how do you keep track of which prince belongs to which line? Well, you tie his identity to his mother. And in this case, his mother, Gautami Balashri, is the whole reason we even know his story.
Seriously, almost everything we know about him comes from this incredible, glowing tribute his mother had carved into stone long after his reign. And just listen to how she talks about him. She says he was as strong as the mythical mountains of the gods, a warrior whose banner of victory was never ever defeated. This isn't just a historical record, it's a mother's epic poem to her legendary son.
And you know what? He pretty much lived up to every single word of that legend. His defining moment, the act he's most famous for, was when he went to war with the very invaders who had humiliated his family, the Shakas. This wasn't just about protecting land. This was personal. This was about reclaiming the honor of the Satavahana name. But let's be real for a second. How can we prove a victory that happened almost 2,000 years ago? I mean, a mother's praise is one thing, but historians need cold, hard evidence. So how do we actually know for sure that he beat the powerful Shaka king, a guy named Nahapana?
Well, the answer, and this is so cool, comes from a pot of money. I'm not kidding. A massive hoard of silver coins was dug up in a place called Jogothambi. And this find turned out to be the smoking gun.
The genius is what he did with these coins. See, he didn't just melt them down and start fresh. No, he took Nahapana's money with the Shaka king's face right there on it, and then he physically stamped his own Satavahana symbols right over his enemy's face. It's one of the greatest power moves in history. It's a message stamped in silver for everyone to see. You're defeated, and your legacy belongs to me now.
And this lines up perfectly with his mother's words. Remember, she didn't just say he won a battle. She said he rooted out the Kshatriya race, that was Nahapana's specific clan, and that he restored the glory of the Satavahana family. The coins tell that exact same story. It's just brilliant.
So, with the invaders totally crushed, you'd think maybe he'd take a break. Nope. Gautamiputra was just getting started. He went on to build an empire that took the Satavahana Dynasty to its absolute highest point. He became the undisputed lord of the Deccan.
And you can really see his power in the titles people gave him. I mean, check these out. He was called Raja, the King of Kings. Or how about this one? Destroyer of the Pride of Kshatriyas. That's basically him saying, I took on all the other tough guy warrior clans and won. These weren't just fancy nicknames. They were declarations of his supreme authority.
His mother's inscription, again, gives us this beautiful, poetic image of just how big his empire was. She claims his rule stretched from sea to sea, and that his horses drank from the waters of 3 oceans, the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal, and the Indian Ocean.
It's her way of saying his dominion covered the entire peninsula.
Okay, so he sounds like a complete superhero, right? But history is never that simple. The heroic story carved in stone by a proud mom is an amazing primary source, but it's not the only source. And modern scholars have to piece together a much more complex picture, one that's full of lingering questions and debates.
Let's go back to that line from his mother's inscription, whose victorious banner was unvanquished. That sounds pretty clear, right? Never defeated? But was that entirely true?
And this is where it gets really complicated and, honestly, pretty interesting. See, we have another inscription, but this one's from a rival, another Shaka king named Rudiraman I, and his inscription tells a very different story. He claims he completely defeated Satakarni twice, but spared his life because of some kind of family relationship. So who do you believe? The big debate among historians is whether the Satakarni in that inscription was Gautamiputra himself or maybe his son. We just don't know for sure, and it's a fascinating historical puzzle.
And that's not the only thing we're fuzzy on. The exact dates of his reign? Still debated. How he actually ran this huge empire on a day-to-day basis? We're not totally clear. Even his title, Eka Brahmana, or Peerless Brahmin, is complicated by the fact that he was also a huge patron of Buddhist monasteries. It just goes to show you that history is a constant process of questioning and reevaluating what we think we know. But look, despite all these scholarly debates, one thing is absolutely beyond question. Gautamiputra Satakarni's impact was immense. He took a dynasty that was completely broken and pretty much single-handedly raised it to its greatest height. He left behind a legacy as the true zenith of the Satavahanas.
If we boil it all down, his legacy really stands on 5 pillars. First, he was the restorer. He saved his dynasty from being wiped off the map. Second, he was the defender. He secured the heartland by kicking out the invaders. Third, the unifier. He built a massive, united empire. Fourth, he was the patron. He created an atmosphere of religious harmony. And finally, fifth, he was the stabilizer. His strong reign brought peace and order, which allowed culture and trade to boom.
In the end, we're left with this thought. The story of Gautamiputra Satakarni, this incredible forgotten emperor, is overwhelmingly told through the proud, loving words of his mother, carved into stone for eternity. And it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of what we call history is shaped not just by the victories themselves, but by who gets to pick up the chisel and tell the story.